Hello, this is a walkthrough of a WJEC GCSE English Language Unit 2 past paper, and as you can see it's the November 2017 paper. I'm going to show you how you can get hold of these past papers and the resource materials and even the mark schemes for free from the WJEC website, just in case you didn't know how to do that. Okay, so you Google WJEC, go to the home page, go to qualifications and scroll down for English. Make sure you're picking the right one because there's a whole load of other subjects on here. So you're looking for GCSE English Language. Scroll down a little bit more, get to past papers and mark schemes. In this case, we're looking for 2017. Loads of options here. Just have to be patient. You're looking towards the bottom of that list. You can see here the autumn or the November English Language Unit 2 past paper. That's the actual question paper. And then here is the resource material. So you can download either of those, both of those for free. There's the paper. I think perhaps the first thing to say is that a paper which is 2 hours long and is worth 80 marks, if you do the maths, it works out roughly 1.5 minutes per mark. And that's a pretty good guide, because if you look at how long they suggest you spend on section A, for instance, so an hour in total, so 60 minutes, 40 marks, that's roughly 1.5 minutes per mark, isn't it? And then for section B, again, worth half the marks, 40 marks, but again, they suggest you spend an hour. The reason I say that is because I think too many students spend far too long on questions that are not worth many marks, and then not long enough on questions which are worth quite a lot of marks. So if you go on the rough calculation that it's for a 1 mark question, you spend roughly 1.5, 2 minutes. Don't obsess about timing yourself, but obviously don't spend 5 minutes on questions that are worth 1 mark. For a question that's worth 10 marks, therefore, you should be spending about 15 minutes rather than 5 minutes or even half an hour. I've also downloaded the resource material. That's the little booklet with the 5 texts in it, usually printed on glossy paper, and you'll need text A for the first few questions. Here's a really simple tip for you. Get a highlighter pen so that when you are doing your exams, you're actually answering the question that you're being asked rather than thinking that you're answering that question. It's very easy to think you're answering it, but to have ended up misreading it. So for instance, in this question here, I would highlight percentage. I'm looking for information on British people, just in case there's information on different nationalities. And I'm looking for information specifically about the percentage of British people who've baked this year. So that when I go to the resource material, I'm not finding information that I think I need, but I'm actually finding information that I really need. So having highlighted those keywords, I have them at the forefront of my mind. I'm much more likely to find the information that I actually need. So I know that I'm looking for a percentage. I know that I'm looking for British people. Well, Britons, here we go. Britons is another word for British people. And I know that I'm looking for the percentage of British people who've baked this year. So I'm fairly confident that this is the answer I need. I check back to the question, and it was the percentage of British people who've baked this year. Britons baked this year, 85%. So I'm confident that I can type in 85% here and I will be correct. Don't have to write it as a full sentence. A lot of longer answers you do need to write, obviously, in full sentences, but when it's a single mark question like this and there's not a lot of space to write your answer, the actual number in this case is fine. Question 2, again, I'm going to use my highlighter. So I'm going to be looking in the resource material for the number 24, 24%. Baked from scratch, that looks quite important. And last 12 months, again, just to make sure that I'm finding the information that I need rather than think that I'm finding it and actually, looking for something entirely wrong. So in the resource material, where I'm looking for 24% from scratch, last 12 months, what were they said to have baked? So I'm narrowing down my search a little bit. So Bake from scratch at home last 12 months. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. So 24%. All right, so I know I'm in the right part of the resource material. 24% down here. Back to the question, what were 24% of people said to have baked from scratch in the last 12 months? So the answer seems to be standard cakes. I've also got here e.g. Victoria sponge and carrot cake, but I think it's probably going to be enough just to put standard cakes. So if I go back to my answer, this time I'm looking for one of these choices. There we go. I didn't need the extra stuff because it wasn't one of the choices. So if I type in here and I want to put a tick, put a massive tick for some reason, let's make it a bit smaller. There we go. I'm happy with that. Question 3A. Again, I'm going to use my highlighter. Second most popular reason that people give for baking. If you were highlighting what you thought were the key words of the question, you might end up highlighting more or fewer words. It's the process that's most important. It just means that I'm much more likely to be looking for the right information. So the second most popular reason that people give for baking. So reasons for baking, top three, 1, 2, 3. We jump back to what I highlighted, looking for the second most popular reason they give. That's the most popular. Second most popular reason is to treat the family. So I reckon that will do. Again, not a lot of room, so to treat the family is going to be fine. And in fact, to prove that, we look at the mark scheme. There you go. To treat the family is perfectly acceptable. Didn't need to write any more than that. 3B, bearing in mind that each of these is worth 1 mark, so a minute and a half. Even if I'm talking about these, it's taking me about a minute and a half at the most to answer them, isn't it? So what percentage of men give this reason for baking? So it's got to be the reason that we had above, isn't it? The one about treating the family. So I just need the percentage of men. So back to the resource material, treating the family. So I've got 28% and 33%. And I've obviously got some kind of color coding going on here. If I look for a key, there we go. Purple is men, and the sort of goldy color is women. So back to the question again, just to double check, what percentage of men? 28%. And that is all I need to write for my answer. If I want to be really super careful, I can put 28% of men, but I think 28% is going to be fine. And in fact, if I look at the mark scheme, there you go, 28% is all they were looking for. Now, the questions that ask you what a particular word or phrase means, and there's usually a couple of these on a paper, you're looking really to make sure that you understand how the word or the phrase is being used in the actual text. Even if you think you know what the word means in normal life, it can sometimes be being used in a slightly different way in the text. So the key thing to do, first of all, obviously, is to highlight the question, keyword to the question. So the article refers to any preconception that people may have had that baking is for girls. What does the word preconception mean? So I've already highlighted that. I found it in text B. Here it is. The tip I'd give you for this kind of question is always read the whole sentence that the word features in. And in fact, sometimes I'd even read the sentence before the sentence that it's in and the sentence after it. So in this case, the TV program has certainly done wonders to challenge any preconception that people may have had that baking is for girls. So if we go back to the question, I already know what preconception means to me in real life, but this could be a slightly different meaning. In this case, it's not, but I have seen it where the word means something slightly different in the context of the resource material. The other thing to say with the choices you get in multiple choice questions in GCSE English papers is that the choices are often all sort of possibly right, and you've got to find the one that is most right. They don't have any of those daft choices you might have had when you were younger, where at least one of the choices is ridiculous. So if I think about the word preconception in this context, where it's talking about challenging something that people may have had, we're talking about something which has already been formed, isn't it? An idea that's already been there. So that could be beforehand, something that's already existing beforehand. A lot of preconceptions are wrong, so it could be that. It certainly is something that's been formed in the past. A judgment to be made, yeah, preconceptions are judgments. So they could all be right. But the one which feels most right for me is an idea that's already been formed. And if I go back to the text, TV program has certainly done wonders to challenge any idea that's already been formed that people may have had. So an idea that's already in their heads that baking is for girls. So that feels to me as though that's the most right out of those choices. Just check the mark scheme because I have been wrong before. There we go. An idea already formed. So it would be that one there. Question A5. There's always going to be an explained question on the paper. And although it's only worth 1 mark, there's a little bit more space here, so they're expecting more than just a couple of words. I always think that with an explained question, your answer should contain the word because, or possibly the word so, but certainly one of those two words. So explain why the writer thinks that baking is officially cool. So if I go to the resource material, I've found that particular part, read the whole sentence. So another unexpected trend is that the most regular bakers are those aged 16 to 34, highlighting that baking is officially cool. So the answer's in here somewhere, isn't it? Why is it officially cool? Well, officially, according to the writer of the article, you may not think it is. So I've got the word trend there, which seems to do with something that's cool, isn't it? Things that are trendy are seen as cool, and that the people who bake the most, the people who do most baking, are those aged 16 to 34. And that kind of age group is a sort of age group who are seen probably as the coolest. Certainly when you get older than 34, believe me, you're no longer cool. And I guess when you're a bit younger than 16, yeah, you think you're cool, but you're not, are you? So something to do with this idea that it's 16 to 34-year-olds. Now, I've got an example, or some examples of the exam board provide here of answers that students have given. Look what they've given this one here, mainly because it just doesn't make sense, does it? Explain why the writer thinks bacon is cool, because both genders bake. Um, that's there, isn't it? That's the thing about baking, men and women both baking, but they've missed the fact that the officially cool bit is down here. So that's not really relevant information. This person here just copies and doesn't really explain. The examiner's written it and not explained. This person's got the full marks though. Regular bakers are quite young, age 16 to 34. If people in that age group bake, that means that it's cool. Or another way of saying it, most bakers now are age 16 to 34, which is the cool years of your life. There's a million different ways of writing this, but you need to get the right bit of the text, obviously. That's completely wrong. And just copying, just quoting is not going to be enough. In fact, it says this in the mark scheme. No mark should be given to those who copy directly with no attempt to explain. So they've put here trend for young people to be the most regular bakers, or those who bake most often, has led to it being considered cool. So I would put here something like because those who bake is the age group that most to be cool. As I said, there's a million ways of writing that answer. The key things are that you found the right bit of the text and that you've not just quoted what it said. Copying that is not enough, as it says in the mark scheme. You've got to explain. So question 6, the examiners have highlighted already in bold the word to. So they're making sure, or trying to make sure, that I know that I need to find 2 barriers. If I only find 1, even if it's correct, I won't get half a mark. I'll just get 0. So I need to make sure I find 2. Biggest barriers is a quote, which means I can use that to scan through the resource material and find the relevant bit of the answer, hopefully more quickly. And I can also scan for a bit more encouragement to put an apron on. So when I go to the resource material, I can just look for those words, bit more encouragement or biggest barriers, rather than having to read the whole thing word for word. And here we go, bit more encouragement, biggest barriers. So I know this bit is the relevant part. I've got to find the two biggest barriers for those who needed a bit more encouragement. For those who needed a bit more encouragement to an apron on, time and mess were found to be the biggest barriers. So again, because it's only a short answer, I only need to write those words. Again, if you want to be really safe, you can always write that as a full sentence, but really anything that's worth 1 mark and has got a short space to write in like this, you can get away with writing just the answer, like we did with the percentages at the beginning of the paper. And if I check the answer in the mark scheme, there we are, time and mess is fine. So question 7 is the first question on text C. Make sure you're always on the right text. I have known students to answer questions on the wrong text and wonder why they didn't get it right. So what are the two aims of the depressed cake shop, this time worth 2 marks? So if you get one of these right and one wrong, you will get 1 mark. So obviously again, I'd highlight 2, although it's fairly obvious they're after 2 things here. They're after the aims and it's the depressed cake shop. Now if I go to the resource material, what I find here is that if I scan for the word aims, I'm not going to find it, but I am going to find depressed cake shop. So I know there's a good chance that my answer is going to be here. So the woman behind the depressed cake shop is hoping her shops will get people talking, blah, 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 blah. Is that the same as an aim? So it's what you want people to do, isn't it? Or something you want to happen. So the woman behind the depressed cake shop is hoping her shops will get people talking about. That sounds like an aim. It's just another way of saying aim, isn't it? So I'm pretty confident I'm in the right territory here. The question wanted me to find 2 of the aims. So she's hoping it will get people talking about good mental health, and she's hoping that it will raise money for mental health charities. So that's roughly what my answer is going to be, but always a good idea when it's worth more than 1 mark, just to try and use your own words where possible. Just quoting sometimes doesn't get you very far. So I'm just going to jump to the mark scheme just to prove that they want something a little bit different from just a straightforward quote, isn't it? So get people talking about mental health. There we are, they've got good mental health here, that's close but not exactly the same. And raise money for mental health charities. Notice they've underlined mental health. That means that if you don't have mental health in your answer, they won't accept just raise money for charities. It's got to be mental health charities. So all I would do is I'd write here, get people talking about mental health, or to get people talking about mental health. And then the second one, I'd write raising money for mental health charities. I won't type those in because it'll take me too long, but you get the gist. So the thing to remember with this question was that the question contained the word aims, and I'd highlighted the word aims, but it wasn't actually a word I could find in the resource material. But I worked out that something that you're hoping your shops will do is another way of saying the same thing as aims, isn't it? Question A8. I've set this before in school, and several of my students wrote really nice answers based on their own ideas, if you like. They just came up with their own thoughts about how baking can improve mental health. Because to be fair, the question doesn't make it really clear that it's what text C says about how baking can improve people's mental health. But it's really highly unlikely that the examiners are just asking you what you think from your own knowledge, isn't it? So it's got to be based on text C. It's not a very well worded question. I think probably they've learnt from their mistake there. So it is specifically about what text C says about how baking can help to improve people's mental health. Again, I'm highlighting almost all the words here, aren't I? But it's the process of highlighting that's really important. Now, this is the first question that's worth quite a few marks, isn't it? It's worth 8 marks. Those of us who teach this exam board have never really got a straight answer for the exam board as to whether 8 marks requires 8 separate answers. And I think the simple answer is it doesn't. It's the quality of what you write rather than the quantity. If you're only going to give 1 point, then you're really only going to get a couple of marks, aren't you? If we have a look at the mark scheme and we look at the mark for the lowest level of answer, apart from a 0, it says 1 to 2 marks, again out of 8, for those who identify and begin to comment on 1 or 2 examples. I always think it's useful to look at the lowest end of the mark scheme and really try and do the opposite of whatever that's saying. So if you jump then to the top end, for 7 or 8 marks out of 8, it says accurate comments. Well, obviously they want accurate comments. They want you to be right, don't they, rather than inaccurate. But it also says wide range. It doesn't say how many is a wide range, but it's obviously quite a few more than 1 or 2. But it doesn't have to be 8. I think this idea that the number of marks of the question equals the number of separate points you have to make, it's probably not true. Once you get above about 5 marks, so questions that are worth 5 marks or 3 marks or even 1 or 2 marks very often are worth the number of marks that the equivalent to the number of points you make. So as we just saw, a 2-mark question needed 2 points. Sometimes summary questions can be worth 5 marks, and they very often expect you to find 5 separate things in the summary. But when you get above 5 marks, so when you get into your 8s and your 10s, the number of points you make isn't related, I don't think, to the number of marks available. So a wide range. This is what they found could be potentially in students' answers. They always write this. It's not a checklist. Reward valid alternatives. So, some students are going to find things the examiners never thought of. You don't have to get all of these to get 8 marks. You just need a decent range. I would say 5 would be a good idea, sort of just above half the number of marks that it's worth. So if it's worth 8, something over half that number, 5 or 6, would be pretty good. Again, it depends on the quality, and they need to be detailed and perceptive. It means that you can't do it very sketchily, and you can't do it with very basic ideas. You're also trying to make sure that you use a combination of your own words and quotations. If you're just using quotes, you're not really proving to the examiner that you know what they suggest or what they mean. So quotes are important to back up your points, but your points should ideally be in your own words, even if those words appear in the answer. So I think the word therapeutic or therapy certainly appears. It's not that you have to come up with an entirely different word, but really, if you're just quoting, that's not going to be enough. So if I go back to the text, I'm not going to go through the whole resource because it'll take ages. But if we start at the beginning, bearing in mind that I've remembered that it's how baking can improve mental health. So I'm looking for anything that might be connected to that, and I'll highlight that again with my highlighter on the exam paper, on the glossy booklet. The woman behind the Depressed Cake Shop is hoping her shops will get people talking about good mental health, as well as raising money for mental health charities. So how can it improve mental health? Well, baking, she's baking in her cake shop, and she's hoping that those shops will help to improve people's discussion about mental health and also raise money for mental health charities. So that's kind of relevant, isn't it? Get people talking and raising money. So baking could be improving people's mental health by getting people talking about it and raising money for it. Just do a little bit more. Baking soothes the soul. How can it not? There is something so reassuring about the process, quietly weighing out butter, sugar, flour, cracking eggs, whisking, beating, and folding. If you're feeling a bit down, a bit of baking helps, Mary Berry once said. It's not just eating the cakes, the biscuits, or the scones that helps to brighten up a blue day, but the process itself is therapeutic. So soothing the soul, your soul is in most people's minds something to do with your mind, isn't it? And it's something to do with your brain. So for mental health, if our souls are soothed, our mental health is improved. The baking process is reassuring. If you're feeling a bit down, that's obviously baking helps to avoid that, which is good for your mental health. Cheering up or brightening up a blue day, the process is therapeutic. So all this is telling me that baking is good for your mental health. How does baking help to improve our mental health? Well, I'd write in my answer that it can get people discussing mental health, which can only improve it, surely. If we raise more money for mental health charities, that can improve people's mental health as well. So I'd write these in my own words, but I know that these are going to be relevant to my answer. So just to give an example, let's do a bit from here. Baking soothes the soul. If you're feeling down, da, 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 da. So I would write, firstly, the text says that baking can help. I like to use the words of the question in my answer. It usually means that you are sticking to the answer, sticking to the question. Firstly, the text says that baking can help improve people's mental health. Because remember I said earlier with the other explain question that it's a really good idea to have the word because or so sometimes works, but because definitely. Because, jump back to the text, it soothes the soul and is therapeutic. So I'm going to use those quotes, but I'm also going to use my own words. So I'll start with a quote. Soothes the soul, which suggests, always a good thing to put in a longer mark answer. When you've got a quote, tell the examiner that you know what it suggests, that it is like a sort of medicine, isn't it? If something soothes you, if you've been stung by nettles and you put some of that pink stuff on, whatever it's called, it soothes your skin. It's like a medicine for your mind. Okay, so again, just so what I've done here is I've used the keywords of the question to keep my answer kind of anchored to the question. I've used a quote, but I've also suggests what that quote shows and how what it shows is relevant to the question, which would be good for your mental health. I know that's a bit long-winded, so that the next couple of points I'd make, I wouldn't have to write quite so much, but it's not a bad idea to write a little bit more than you might think initially. Better to write more than less, certainly. Not a huge amount of space. Actually, there is, isn't there? There's quite a lot here. You don't have to fill the space, but obviously, if you've got that much space for your answer, they're giving you a pretty heavy hint that a couple of lines isn't going to be enough. These are the bits here that I highlighted. Feeling a bit down, brighten up a blue day. So I could put something about it also says that baking will, I think it was, brighten up the day. What was the other thing it said? Something like that, wasn't it? If you're feeling a bit down. Down, which both suggest that it will lift your spirits, which is, of course, good for mental health. Just feel sometimes it's worth making what I call stating the obvious here, so that the examiner's got no reason to say I haven't explained it thoroughly. If I just left it at it also says that baking will brighten up a blue day, that's not explaining it, that's just quoting it, isn't it? So it sometimes feels like I'm stating the obvious or even repeating myself. But as long as I've got time, if I'm a reasonably quick writer, which you need to be, I'm afraid, in these exams, um, then I can afford to write a little bit more than you might do if you were just giving the answer in a lesson, for instance. Yeah. So I'd go on and I'd probably make, say, 4 or 5 more of those in total, making sure that I'm keeping to the question, that I'm including quotations, but I'm also explaining what those quotations suggest and how they're connected to the idea of improving mental health. 5 or 6 of those would be enough for, I think, for full marks. So question A9 is on text D. So again, make sure you're on the right text. What does John Waite mean when he says he is not a perpetually perky person? So it's another one of those where you have to find the quote in the text. And as before, I would suggest that you read the whole sentence that it's part of, and sometimes even the sentence that's before and after it. I found it in the text. It's right at the beginning. I am unashamed to admit that I am a moody person. I don't mean that I sit there constantly grumping and cursing the world, but I am not a perpetually perky person. Some days I won't feel like getting out of bed because I battle with depression. Now, this is slightly different than the previous one because we had a choice of 4 last time. This time we've got to actually put it in our own words. It's a slightly tricky one, this one, because it does depend partly on your understanding of these words. Just reading the sentences around it on their own isn't going to do the whole job, I'm afraid. So it does test your vocabulary. Most people probably know the word perky means sort of upbeat, cheerful, doesn't it? But a lot of people perhaps wouldn't know the word perpetually. Um, as an English teacher, of course, I do, but it's not everybody would know what it means. So if something is perpetual, it means forever or constantly. So if he says he's not a perpetually perky person, he is, in other words, saying he's not constantly cheerful, he's not permanently upbeat and happy. So let's just go back and test that theory. I'm unashamed to admit I am moody. I don't mean I sit there grumping and cursing the world, but I am not permanently cheerful. Some days I wouldn't feel like getting out of bed. So that seems to fit, doesn't it? My interpretation seems to work there. So I would type in, let's do it. He he means he is not constantly or permanently cheerful and upbeat. And again, there's a million different ways of writing this. The examiners have got to accept a massive range of potentially perfectly correct answers that would all be written slightly differently. The mark scheme says 1 mark for he's not constantly happy or cheerful, or his moods are changeable. He can be moody. So this one here is close to what I've written, isn't it? He's not constantly happy or cheerful. And I've written he's not constantly or permanently cheerful and upbeat. That's close enough. That would get a mark. A10 is similar, isn't it? It's another one about what does something mean. This time you've got a choice of 4. So what is meant when weight refers to baking as a form of artistic expression? So I know because that's a quote, I can scan for that in the resource material. So I don't have to read it word for word. I'm scanning for the phrase. There we go. Form of artistic expression. Oops. Just that bit will do. Thank you. So what is meant when he refers to baking as a form of artistic expression? He bakes instead of drawing and painting. Like I said last time, these choices could all be sort of correct, and your job is to find the one which is the most correct for that particular context. So he bakes instead of drawing and painting. So I'll look at that. So what I found is that whether my mood is up, down, or at some place in the middle, I bake. I bake because it's a comfort blanket and because it's a form of artistic expression for me. I always joke I was born with 2 left hands. I can't paint. Even drawing a circle is tricky. But inside me, there's an artist screaming to get out. So he bakes instead of drawing and painting. But he said he's not very good at those. So it could be that. He produces cakes that are professional in appearance. I don't see that anywhere here. I mean, they're going to be professional, but he's not saying that here. And that's not what a form of artistic expression means. Um, he decorates cakes to make them look attractive. I mean, that would be artistic, but he doesn't say anything here about decorating them. So it's unlikely to be that one. Or he uses baking to be creative and imaginative. So the choice really seems to be between this one here and this one. I don't think it's either of those two. He bakes instead of drawing and painting. And he says he's not very good at painting and he can't draw. But he doesn't say he's doing it instead of that. He's saying that he is doing it, he's like an artist inside him screaming to get out. That one feels like it's this one. He wants to be creative and imaginative, and he can't do it through drawing and painting. He does it through baking. So I'm going to go with that as my choice. And then I'll check with the mark scheme. uses baking to be creative and imaginative. Job done. Question 11 is on text E. Again, make sure you've got the right text. This text is about a journalist who writes about baking. What magazine does she write for? So just in case there are other ones mentioned, it's the one that she writes for. So I'm really scanning for the word magazine or something like magazine. So article, you get articles in magazines, but it doesn't give the name of a magazine. That's what I'm looking for, isn't it? What magazine does she work for? Does she write for? So there's nothing here. Towers are wonky. Her lips are silent. She writes instructions for the readers of Home magazine. What magazine does she write for? Home magazine. There we go. So that's what I would type in. And again, I would just write the words Home magazine. It's a 1 mark question. I don't need to write a long answer. I've got room for a long answer. Check that with the mark scheme. Award 1 mark for Home magazine. No marks to be awarded to candidates who write readers of Home magazine. So I guess what they're suggesting here is that if you're not very careful and you just go, oh yeah, there's Home magazine, and you see a little bit more in front of it, if you copy more than you need, you're not going to get a mark for it. At the end of the day, the name of the magazine, what magazine does she write for, is Home magazine, not the readers of Home magazine. That would be a weird name for a magazine. Question 12 is a how does the writer question, and you're going to get one of these on either Unit 2 or Unit 3. They can be quite tricky. In fact, I think these are amongst the hardest of the questions that you ever get asked. This one was only worth 5. They're often worth 8 or 10 marks. Not a huge amount of space is there either. It's just about a page for this one, so they're not expecting a huge amount. How does the writer convey? So convey just means to get across, to communicate, to sort of get the idea over to a reader. The care that has gone into the creation of the gingerbread house. Again, I'm highlighting a lot of words here. I appreciate that. But in fact, I'm trying to highlight far more than just a couple of words, aren't I? There we go. It's not about how many or how few words you highlight. It's the process of highlighting. I'm much more likely to answer the question if I've highlighted the words. Also, they do stand out more. So when I jump in between the resource material and the question, those words are going to, they're going to catch my eye. They are literally highlighted. I'm going to see those words more than the other words. Now, questions that ask how does the writer need more than just quotes. They need just more than examples. They need you to explain what it is the writer does. And I often think about things like the methods, the techniques, or the ways. So it's not enough just to find bits where they are showing the care, in this case, that's gone into the creation of the house. You've got to explain what the writer does, what methods, techniques, ways. Most often it is the words, the language, but it's also other techniques, and it can be a whole range of things. Talking of which, looking at the mark scheme again, remember I said about how it's often a good idea to look at the description for the lowest marks. So what are people trying to do the opposite of? Well, if you're going to get 1 mark out of 5, then it's because you've given superficial details. You've commented on superficial details, which means you're just skimming the surface. You're making very, very simplistic points that probably a year 7 student or even younger could make. Basic textual reference. Textual reference is just a posh word for quotations or pointing out specific parts of a text. So you want to do the opposite of this, and for 5 out of 5 they're looking for accurate and perceptive comments, so something where you're digging deeper. That phrase, again, a wide range of details, so certainly more than just 1 or 2 points, and well selected examples, so you are using quotes and evidence to back up your point. But they also talk about, for 4 marks and 5 marks, analysis of how language is used, or subtleties of the writer's technique, which is what I was saying a couple of minutes ago about how the writer does it, not just what they do, but the different techniques and methods and ways that they use. And if you look at the mark scheme, these are the sort of things that the examiners think that candidates might pick out. So the question was, again, how does the writer convey, or how does the writer get across to us the care that's got into the house, making of the house. So they found things like evidence that a lot of thought has gone into it. Well, that would suggest care, wouldn't it? And that's based on quotes like the pauses, she chews her bottom lip, the sort of thing you do if you're taking your time and really thinking about something. In other words, taking great care. Most painstaking, if you take pains, then you are going to some lengths, you're going to a lot of trouble, potentially causing you some pain, mental or emotional or even physical, because you're going to such lengths to do it. She handles it carefully, and the evidence for that was gently placing it on the floor. The fact this is now a technique that the writer uses, that they list some of the ingredients. So this isn't just thrown together with random stuff. They have a list of particular things that need to go into it, which again suggests that care has been taken, and so on. So I want to show you an example of an answer to that question. If I just skim through these for a sec. So question 12. The exam board often provide examples of very poor answers as well, so we can see what to avoid. How does the writer convey the care? It's gone into the creation. She loves gingerbread men and she wants it to be Christmas, which is nonsense, isn't it, really? It doesn't really answer the question at all. In this extract, Sarah Vaughan tries to display the care that's gone into the gingerbread house. So using the words of the question to start the answer always a good idea. By using soft adverbs, you don't need to say what kinds of words, whether they're verbs, adverbs, nouns, or adjectives. In the WJEC GCSE, it's not expected that you will identify the word class. Okay, so you could just say words instead of adverbs. To make the woman Kathleen Eden feel gentle. Yeah, sort of. Okay, so she's taking care, she's feeling gentle. They need to give examples though. Just saying that she uses soft adverbs or soft words isn't really that helpful if you don't give the examples of those words or a couple of examples. Although it may be a tedious task, she's struggling to find the words to express. So that's a shame. That there was a really good idea, but they just didn't back it up with any evidence. New idea here now. Moving on, it may be a tedious task. She's struggling to find the words to express the combination of frustration and fulfillment. This is a long quote, way too long, really. Um, you need to be quoting just sort of one or two words, ideally. Even just one word is perfect. The word painstaking, there we are. So they've zoomed in on one word here. They didn't need all these other ones here. The word painstaking applies a thought that although it's hard, you persist. See, what I would have done here is I'd have said, which suggests that you take care. I'd come back to the words of the question to show the examiner that I'm answering the actual question and not something that's vaguely like it. By using words like ever so carefully, it conveys a sense of precision and care. Yeah, that's all right, isn't it? That's done much more briefly as well. It doesn't have to be the word adverbs. You'd get the same mark for writing just the word words. But there we are. Ever so carefully conveys a sense of precision. So that's okay. Unfortunately, although there's some relevant selection, it lacks a focus on the question. So really, there's only a couple of places where it does the whole job. That was a good idea, but no evidence. That was just really quite long-winded. This was the bit that earns it 1 mark. It needed to do this 3 or 4 or 5 times. Here's a better answer. Vaughan first conveys care has gone into the gingerbread house by using imagery. So how does the writer do it? She uses imagery. That's one of the methods or techniques or ways that I was talking about before. Kathleen Eden chews her bottom lip, meaning she's contemplating and considering what she's written. Furthermore, Vaughan adds the adjective. Like I said, you don't have to identify the word class. The word would be fine. Dissatisfaction, meaning she's not content with the piece she's written. It shows Eden wants to take care in her work because she's not happy with what she's produced. The examiner's written here the house should be the focus, because if you remember, the question was, how does the writer convey the care that's gone into the creation of the house, not into writing about it? They've got a tick, they've got some credit here, but they're not going to get full marks if they carry on like this. They're going to do okay, but they won't get 5 out of 5 because they've just misread the question. I suspect you can see this is actually their question paper, and they haven't highlighted the keywords like we do. And that's probably why they've drifted away from focusing on the house to writing about something slightly different. Gets a tick here. Also, Vaughan describes the process of a gingerbread house, his most painstaking of baking tasks. So again, quite a short quote, which is good. This shows Eden has to take pride and put care into the work, as gingerbread houses are so hard to create. Yeah, I would have just highlighted the word painstaking. I'd have zoomed in on it and said the word painstaking suggests, that great care has been taken, almost to the extent that it causes pain, whether that's mental or emotional pain. Um, it goes on. So what have we got there? One, slightly unfocused. Point two, three, 4, 5. So there are actually 5 separate points that are made here. It is worth only 5 marks, and you don't need to write a huge amount. You certainly don't need to make 8, 9, 10 separate points. Let's have a look at the last point they make. Lastly, Vaughan shows that she must take pride in their gingerbread house because of the time it takes to make one. In Eden's case, her gingerbread house has been, quote, 4 hours. That's a nice short quote. However, Eden's creation is still not perfect. The tiles are wonky. Look how they're using quotes to flow as part of their own sentences. I call that blending quotations, which is a really nice thing to do if you can. This just highlights the care she wants to put into her house, as even the smallest mistake can hinder a person. So they're doing the really key thing, which is they're explaining how their quotes show that she's taking care. All the while she's making notes and telling others to use a ruler whilst in the windows. This shows the skill that must be required for such a painstaking task. So 4 out of 5, not bad. Probably lost the mark because that first point wasn't specifically about the house. It was about the magazine, wasn't it? About writing it, which wasn't what the question asked. So 4 or 5, hopefully fairly succinct, brief paragraphs in which you pick out a different example and you explain how your short quotation, ideally just one word, shows that she's taken care. And that's usually something that feels like it's stating the obvious, but it's necessary. If you do something gently, for example, here, it suggests that you are taking care. It feels a bit obvious to say that, but that's the sort of thing you need. I'm not going to write an answer to this one because it will take ages, but you can see what a really good one looks like, or what a pretty good one looks like from that example there. Question 13, worth 10 marks, and look how much space you've got to write your answer in here. So they are expecting a pretty decent length of answer. So using information from text D, make sure I know which texts I'm supposed to be doing here. Easily mistaken. So text D and E synthesize the reasons why people bake. Most of the students I've ever taught are terrified of synthesis questions initially, which is crazy because I think they're amongst the easiest questions, certainly those that are worth a lot of marks. Don't be afraid of synthesis questions. It's a strange word, but actually they're really asking you to do something quite simple. Just looking underneath it as well, here you've got a reminder you must refer to both texts to support your comments. So by that they mean you need quotes, really. You must refer to both texts. So you need quotes from both of the texts to back up your points. So synthesize actually in my vocabulary means to blend things together to create something new. And that sort of implies that you need to compare in a synthesis question, but you do not. You do not need to compare. In fact, I would say avoid it like the plague. There will always be a compare question on one of the 2 exam papers. If the synthesis question is on the unit 2, that means the compare will be on unit 3. So because they're 2 separate questions, that implies, doesn't it, that they are separate skills. So perhaps the most important thing, one of the 2 most important things to know about synthesis questions is you do not compare. It's a waste of time, a waste of marks. They're a complete separate question for that, which will be on the other paper. The other thing to say about synthesis questions is that the actual structure of the answers is perfectly simple. Believe it or not, it's absolutely fine. You can get full marks if the first half of your answer is about text D and what that says about the reasons why people bake. So using quotes and your own words to thoroughly go through the text and find a good wide range of examples and reasons why people bake. And then the second half of your answer can do exactly the same, but for text E. And there is no need for the 2 texts to appear together in the same paragraph. So if you could almost imagine 2 rectangles, one above the other, rectangle 1 represents the answer to bit on text D, and rectangle 2 is almost like a little map of your answer on text E. Okay, so these are two separate halves of your answer. There is absolutely no need to put the two texts together and find similarities and differences. You will just be wasting time and wasting marks. To show you that, here's an example of an answer which gets, I think, 9. Yeah, so nearly perfect. And I'm not going to read through it in any great detail, but you can see that although they've gone text D, text E, text D, text E, and then finally text D again, it would be absolutely fine if this answer was a paragraph on text D, another paragraph on text D, maybe another one on text D, and then E and E again. Yeah, so there's absolutely no need to blend the two texts together in your answer. Why this person has gone D, I don't know, but that is not necessary at all. So they've kept to the question. They've actually underlined rather than highlighted, but that's okay. So the reasons why people bake. So you're looking through text D and you're just finding all, hopefully for 10 marks, all the reasons in text D why people bake. You're putting them in your own words. You're sometimes backing them up with quotes. You're certainly not just using quotes. The example are a little bit vague on whether quotes are essential, but I think if in doubt, where it says here you must refer to both texts, it feels to me like they're suggesting that quotes are not inappropriate. So I would include them. So for example, text D is about someone with depression and how they are baking to cope with it. The writer explains that he bakes because it provides a calming effect on him, shown when he says it's a comfort blanket. So we're looking at the reasons why people bake, and the examiner's ticked to cope with depression, and they've also ticked comfort blanket. So we're just keeping to the question. The most common mistake, apart from trying to compare, that people make on synthesis questions is they don't actually focus on what the question is asking them to find. There's lots of other stuff in these texts. They're just asking you to filter out everything apart from the reasons why people bake. He also says it's a way for him to be creative and express himself without having to use pens and paint. So that's another reason he does it, to be creative. So tick, tick, tick. Then, as I said, I don't know why this candidate jumps to text E. That's fine, but I would just go text D, text D, text D. In fact, potentially all in one paragraph if I have to. And then I would go, forget about text D now. What about text E? And I just go through that one, trying to pick out all the different reasons that the people bake in my own words and backing them up with quotations. And that's what this person does. And if you look at the mark scheme, for 9 to 10 marks out of 10, accurate and perceptive comments. So obviously accurate in the sense that they are relevant to the question. They're not about something else other than the reasons why people bake. So they keep them to the question. Wide range of reasons means you're finding most, if not all, of the relevant points. What they call collation skills here does perhaps imply that you need to blend your answers together. If you collate something, you bring things from different sources and put them together. But trust me, there's absolutely no expectation that you will compare, you'll say anything about similarities or differences. That's not required. That's for your compare and contrast question, which will be on the other paper. You get a series of questions that are quick, sort of 1 mark questions, 1 or 2 mark questions in the editing section. So read the sentences below and then answer the questions that follow. Stacey was determined to reach home. Something delay. It was something that she saw John before he left for work. Circle the word below that best fits gap A. So Stacey was determined to reach home beyond delay. Doesn't make sense to me. Stacey was determined to reach home achieving delay. Nah. She was determined to reach home saving delay. Doesn't really make sense, does it? Stacey was determined to reach home without delay. Yes, of course, it's that one, isn't it? So remember, they're asking you to circle the word. If you write the word in the gap, I've seen it done. And I think if you've got an examiner who's feeling positive, then you'll probably get away with it. But it's a test of your reading skills as much as anything else, and it does say circle the word. So best to do what they tell you to do. Circle the word that best fits gap B. So she's determined to reach home without delay. So she's in a hurry. She doesn't want to delay. It was something that she saw John before he left for work. So I'm guessing, without even looking at the words here, that it's going to be something like important. If I hadn't got these words, my guess would be it was important. So something like that. It was quickly that she saw John. No, that doesn't make sense. It was obligatory. Now, some students will know what that means, but a lot of people won't do. So, you might have to just put that one down and hope it's not that, and hope that another one makes more sense. Obligatory actually means that it's sort of compulsory, something you are obliged to do, you have to do. That doesn't really make sense anyway, even though I know what it means. It was vital that she saw John before he left for work. Now, it could well be that. Vital means important. But just always check all four choices, because it might be that the last one is even better. In this case, it's not. It was unimportant that she saw John. Well, it's the opposite of that, isn't it? It's important. So it can't be that. It's that one. So again, I'd circle that word, and that would be 2 marks. Let's just check it with the mark scheme. There we go. They've highlighted them rather than circling them, but without and vital were the correct answers. These questions test your close reading skills, really, and also your grammatical knowledge. For an English teacher like me, it's usually fairly obvious, but I know that it's not always obvious for younger people. So you have to read these carefully, because they're all quite similar. If you don't, if you rush through it, you could easily misread one. So if a customer wishes to receive a full refund, he or she must have a receipt. Notice that I'm reading it slowly. Obviously, you have to read it in your head in the exam. You could read it under your breath, as long as you don't make too much noise, but you could sort of whisper the words under your breath. That feels okay to me. If a customer wishes to receive a full refund, he or she must have a receipt. I like that. I think that could well be the answer, but I'm going to check the other three just in case there's one that works even better. If customers wishes to receive a full refund, well, that already doesn't make sense. If customers wish would do, wouldn't it? Or if a customer wishes, but that doesn't really work. I don't think that's grammatically correct. If a customer wished to receive a full refund, he or she must have a receipt. Well, we're kind of talking about something in the future here, aren't we? Something that you would, you want to get a refund. Wished is the wrong tense. It feels like that's already happened. That doesn't feel right to me either. And the last one, if customers wished to receive a full refund, they must have a receipt. So the only difference between this one and this one is a customer, or if customers. But again, that feels like it's in the wrong tense. So of the four, this one is the one that doesn't give me any doubts at all. So I'm going to tick that one and check with the mark scheme. And lo and behold, it's that. I've actually noticed that the mark scheme has misquoted the choices. These are not what B, C, and D say. So come on, exam board, sort your life out, get your act together. And then lastly, for section A, for the first half of the exam paper, A16, you're always going to get one of these on a unit 2, putting the sentences in the right order. There's a couple of clues that you can look for, a couple of tips I can give you with these that often work. For instance, if you have a sentence that contains a pronoun, and a pronoun is just a word that we use instead of a name, so he, she, it, they, I, they're pronouns. And in real life, you wouldn't usually say he before you said who he is. You normally say somebody's name, and then the next time you mention them, because it feels a bit weird to just keep saying Harry all the time, I've got a friend called Harry. Harry lives down the road. Harry sometimes comes around my house. Harry and I sometimes go to the pub. It's beginning to sound weird. So after the first time you've used a name, we often then use pronouns. So I've got a mate called Harry. He lives down the road. He sometimes comes around my house, and he and I go to the pub. So it's unlikely that he will come before Harry. So the chances are that the sentence that names the person is going to come in early in the sequence. And in fact, this is the one that I think comes first. Harry began to assemble the ingredients he would need to make James a birthday cake. Feels like the beginning of a story. I know this one says firstly, so that feels like it's going to come quite early, but I don't think it makes sense for that to come before this one, because again, it uses a pronoun, and I don't know if this is my first sentence in a story or in a paragraph. It doesn't make sense really to have he before I name him. So I think 3 comes first. Harry began to assemble the ingredients he would need to make James a birthday cake. Firstly, he took the eggs, so I think that one comes first. Let's put fact, let me write this by hand. What am I trying to do here? Bear with me. There we go. I think that's first. I think that comes second. So Harry began to assemble the ingredients that he would need to make James a birthday cake. Firstly, he took the eggs and flour from his bag and put them on the worktop. He panicked when he discovered the final ingredient was missing. Well, final ingredient is a clue that feels like it needs to come later on, doesn't it? It's the last thing he's looking for. So I don't think that one's 3. Harry began to assemble ingredients. Firstly, he took the eggs and put them on the worktop. After searching the cupboard, he was then able to add sugar. Yeah, that feels like that comes next. He's got the first lot of ingredients. Then he was able, then suggests it's coming a little bit later on in the story, doesn't it, in the sequence, and he's got to be adding it to something. So this can't come really at the beginning. So I think that's going to be my 3rd. Harry began to assemble. First he took the eggs. After searching the cupboard, he was able to add the sugar. He panicked when discovering that the final ingredient was missing. So that feels like that's going to come next. Could it be this one? After a frantic dash to the car, the butter was discovered. It can't be that one, can it? Because we don't know what he's looking for. So this one feels like it's next. So he searches the cupboard. He panics when he discovers the final ingredient. So he's got his ingredients, sugar and baking powder, but he panics when he can't find that one. So I reckon that one's 4. And then the final ingredient, after a frantic dash to the car, the butter was discovered. So that must be the final ingredient. So I reckon that one is 5. The questions ask me which one should come 3rd and which one should come 5th. So I need to put them all into order and write my numbers here so that then I can check what the question's asking me for. It's asking which one comes 3rd. Well, 3rd in my sequence is sentence 5. So I write 5 very badly in that box. And which one should come 5th? Well, the 5th one in my sequence was actually sentence number 1. So I put that. Looks like a 7. Does it look any more like a 1 now? Well, certainly there isn't a sentence 7. So there we go. And the mark scheme says 3rd comes sentence 5 and 5th comes sentence 1. Hello. This is a walkthrough of a WJEC GCSE English Language Unit 2 past paper, and as you can see, it's the November 2017 paper. I'm going to show you how you can get hold of these past papers and the resource materials and even the mark schemes for free from the WJEC website, just in case you didn't know how to do that. Hello. This is a walkthrough of a WJEC GCSE English Language Unit 2 past paper, and as you can see, it's the November 2017 paper. I'm going to show you how you can get hold of these past papers and the resource materials and even the mark schemes for free from the WJEC website, just in case you didn't know how to do that.